Once again, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our second talk in our New Mainers series with Connecting Across Cultures. And tonight we have George Budagu Makoko here to talk to us about his immigration story and his citizenship story. And before we introduce George, we're going to introduce Kit Harrison, who is representing Connecting Across Cultures. She's going to tell you a little bit about their organization and also introduce George. Kit, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you to the Camden Public Library for co-hosting this series on the immigrant experience in Maine with our community group, Connecting Across Cultures, which is based in the Mid-Coast. The goal of our community group is to educate ourselves and others about immigration, and also to work on creating the infrastructure to welcome all new Mainers who move to the Mid-Coast and help them thrive. I am very excited and honored to welcome my very good friend, George Budagu Makoko, who is here to speak with us today as the second presenter in this series. I have had the pleasure of knowing George for a number of years. I first met him through a public presentation at the Rockland Library, much like this one tonight, though not virtual. After the presentation, I was inspired to introduce myself and a friendship grew. For the past 4 years, I've worked professionally with George as editor of Amjambo Africa, a publication we founded together as a project of the nonprofit George founded, Ladder to the Moon Network, which you'll hear more about from George himself. George is a remarkable person who is widely known and admired for his particular combination of gentle purposefulness, kindness, ambition, intelligence, and resilience. His life story has been marked both by adversity and joy. He has a beautiful family and has built a fine life for all of them here in Maine with us. Throughout the challenges, George kept his focus squarely on helping others and continues to do so tonight when he will help us all understand firsthand the personal experience of someone who has lived the immigrant experience in Maine and wants to help pave the way for an easier entrance for other newcomers. Please join me in welcoming George Budagu Makoko. George, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kit, and thank you, Julia, but also for the whole Connecting Across Cultures team and all Camden residents. I really appreciate your invitation, and I'm glad to be here tonight. I just want to thank Kit for the work that she does with Amjambo Africa. Every time I find an opportunity to talk to the public how wonderful the work that she does every day, I always take the opportunity to do so. So Kit, I thank you for the whole work that you've done throughout these 3 years and some months. So tonight I'm going to, like Julia said, I'm going to read a bit about my book, and then I'll go to Slideshow, and then I'll leave a time, of course, for Q&A. So hopefully we're going to have a good time here and a good conversation. So let me start by reading briefly about my book, and I'm going to read chapter 1, and I'm going to read also chapter 35. A Kinyamulenge saying, where there is no hatred and division, the skin of a flea can be slept on by 2 people. Translation, where there is love, everything is possible. I was born in the southern Kivu province of Eastern DR Congo, about 3,000 feet above sea level in the northwest of the high mountains of the Ruzizi Plain in the village of Kahuna. My tribe was spread out over the Uvira, Fizi, and Mwenga zones in an area called Mulenge. We are the Banyamulenge, the people living in Mulenge. We lived in a land of honey and milk. Rivers flowed abundantly through the mountains, and the wells sprang up in the surrounding forests and valleys. There was no infrastructure, no roads, cars, trains, or waterways connecting us to the modern world. Our village's enclave positioned behind the high mountains made it totally inaccessible. To reach the cities near the area, we had to walk for several days. You might wonder why my tribe would live in a place that was so far removed from the rest of the nation. My ancestors discovered the area while grazing their cattle and chose to make it their home because it offered privacy and endless space for their livestock. Because of our culture, I never had a chance to discuss with my mother or my grandmother the circumstances of my birth. I was later stunned to discover that the Congo has the world's highest birth mortality rate due to the lack of infrastructure and the absence of hospitals and medical clinics and the presence of poverty and the corruption which arose from bad leadership that has characterized the Congo for years. In this era of high dependency upon technology, it is maybe hard for you to believe that there is a place where people live without doctors, nurses, and hospitals, but it is true. The women in a village did not have the resources of women here in America. Yet they helped each other deliver babies in a village, developing a mutual support system that managed to sustain the opportunity to system that managed to sustain the community throughout the years. The women were devoted, brave, and distinguished by an exceptional tenacity, enabling them to bring thousands of lives into the world and save many who might have otherwise died in childbirth. Yes, they had many gifts, talents, and skills, but ultimately, I see the grace of God at work. I am a witness to the power of the Almighty God that protects us all, regardless of the corner of the world in which we may live. I know that if it were not for God, I would never have survived all that came to pass in the Congo. There are still millions of people who are living in desperate conditions in Mulenge and around the world. As I traveled the world experiencing and exploring many cultures, I saw certain people living in miserable conditions while others dwelled in abundance and safety. There were times I found this disparity deeply confusing and disheartening. But as I have grown and matured and gained more understanding of the world in which we live, I have come to remember the scripture in Ecclesiastes that says, "There's nothing new under the sun." There has been imbalance and inequity in the world for many generations, and there's little I can do to change it. Accepting this fact has helped to ease my mind and release the anxiety I feel when I think about the past. This also helps me to enjoy the present and strive for the future. In a song by Congolese musician Redi Hamisi, he sings to God, asking him why some people have missed everything in their lives and others have never missed a thing. As for me, I ask, what really matters in our lives? Aren't peace, love, happiness the things that we need in this world? These are the things that humanity has always sought after from generation to generation. If our environment does not offer what we need, it is time to move to whatever environment offers a greater degree of peace and happiness we constantly seek. We were created to live in peace. It is human nature to seek it out. When we were in the Congo during the worst of the troubles and had no peace, we believed we were in hell. We thought we might find heaven somewhere else. But life doesn't really change. Just as you can find both heaven and hell in Africa, the same is true everywhere. Heaven is everywhere and hell is everywhere. It all depends upon your outlook. This is what I tell my loved ones. When you are suffering, it all comes down to your perspective and how you embrace your experience. You can say, I'm ruined, finished, a failure, or you can say, this suffering must surely pass. I must fight to change this situation. There is a saying in French that means no matter how long the nighttime lasts, eventually the morning will come. During these long, dark nights of the soul, we must believe this. God is never far from our side. Without such a faith, the burdens becomes too heavy to bear. That was chapter 1. And I'm going to read briefly about my time here in the US. So that's it, chapter 35. We never know where life is taking us. Sometimes life takes us far away like a sheep to be slaughtered in the market, and we have little control over our own liberty and happiness. We must learn to live with whatever situation we are facing. My first job here in the US started at 5 a.m. and I worked until 2:30 p.m. Since I had no vehicle, I walked to work, about 3 miles a round trip every day. The alarm that woke me up every morning traumatized me. I could hear it everywhere I went, even when I was busy shopping in the mall. It took many years until long after I had left my first American job for my ears to clear out the sound that hunted me down. I was working in a company that produced different types of fast food chicken. I worked with machines that ran nonstop every corner of the building. It was very cold and loud inside. Because we had to wear a helmet, protective glasses, gloves, and waterproof boots, it was hard to recognize each other as we walked by. When my machine would break down, I found great relief and tried to rest while it was being fixed. Sometimes I was completely exhausted, and I went behind the piled boxes of frozen chicken and fell asleep. At such times, I had to urge my friend to watch over me so that my supervisor will not find me sleeping and send me home for good. I knew what was risky, but I was tired. I slept very easily and never minded the cold and freezing temperatures. For 1 year, I worked for this company. In that job, my intellectual capacity and education were unnecessary. What mattered was my physical strength. I began to missing every piece of my life back home, even the parts of my life I never used to like. I had suddenly realized that my new world had turned rough. My work environment destroyed my hope, along with the expectations of better life that I had held on to since I left Rwanda and started traveling around the world, believing that things could only go from good to great. I have realized that sometimes life can be so misleading. As we become deeply absorbed in our present emotions and feelings, when we have what we need and are striving for bigger future, we rarely think that we can lose what we already have. And when we had lost everything that we had once held on to, we can completely forget that we ever had them in the first place. On July 12, 2004, I was fortunate to finally get free from my first job. I was hired by Avesta Housing Corporation. This was a dream coming true and a blessing I had prayed for, but I had no idea what a heavy burden it will be or how weary it will become trying to carry it. The system was totally different than the workplace I have ever seen back home. It was a demanding and detailed job with many deadlines and regulations that I had to pay attention to. It required a lot of effort. I found everything puzzling from day one when I walked into the company and was introduced to my future colleagues whose name I could hardly retain. People were very nice, smiling and shaking hands, but my heart was troubled. I wondered, how am I going to survive this whole new world in front of me? When they brought me a brand new computer, I thought, they have wasted their money. I thought that I could do everything manually. I had no idea that nothing is done in America without a computer. I had no way of knowing what lay before me. It frightened me, wondering how I was going to do everything with the computer. But what frightened me the most was being fluent in English. I needed more English than I had because understanding is the beginning of knowledge. I knew deep in my mind that I needed to grow professionally, and Avesta Housing was the best place for me to be. But I went through such a tremendous pressure that I almost quit. So that tells you a little bit of my childhood story, where I was born in DRC Congo, grew up there, and moved here. And my bit of experience here, my first job, and also how to adjust in this new system that is very complex compared to the system that I know back home. So I'm going to do a slideshow, and then we're going to proceed. So this first slide, just want to make a point here that the circumstances of one's birth are random. And here's a picture of the baby George, the Prince George, with the William and the Kate. And you can see that the entourage of people surrounding the baby born, how happy they are, but also how it made the news. And the millions of people watched how he was exiting from the hospital. And you could tell that he's surrounded by love. But yet, if you look at the next slide, I want you just to have a comparison here. Not everybody is lucky to be born like a Prince George. So some are born in very miserable conditions, even though they didn't make any choice as to where they have to be born. And the next slide is, some people are born rich. And it's one of the myths about Africa is that some people, all African people are poor, but that's not the case. So you can find rich people in Africa, same way you can find rich people here and poor people all everywhere. And this is another picture that I want you to look at. And if you look at the condition of this mother here with the baby and the dog aside, you can tell that they are living in a very miserable conditions, but yet they didn't have any choice about it. There's a saying that they used to say in Africa that when the rich people are looking at poor people, some of them always think that poor people don't work hard enough. But I tell you, some environment, it just even if you work so hard, it's just almost impossible to make it, to break through. So it just all comes with the system and the environment that you're growing in that will give you more opportunity or less opportunity to make a better life. So my humble philosophy here is that nobody chooses the location, time, and parents of the birth. Lucky people are born in a peaceful and prosperous place to loving parents. Life is the single most precious gift, and every action that one takes aims to protect and optimize it. And I always look at how here in America we're all busy and get up in the morning and trying to go to work from place to places, and all comes down on how we want to treat our life, we want to improve our lives, how we want to be successful. So it's very important that we know that life is the most precious gift that we have, and nobody should take it away from anybody or compromise anybody's life. So here's the house that I was born in. And as you can tell here, it's a village. And in this village, there are almost 100 houses. But one thing that I love here and I missed back then, of course, before things changed, it was very peaceful. And the kids could play, we could go, you could see the forest around the houses, and we will just go in the forest and spend time there without worrying about anything. And when we were hungry, we would come back home. And it doesn't matter which house you go to, as long as it's one of the houses in the village, you just go there and find food to eat and find something to drink. So it was a peaceful then, but things, of course, have changed over the time. So I left there, my village, and moved into this city. This is a city called Uvira, and it was like 3 or 2 days walking from my village. And here was very beautiful. But one of the things that I found when I came in this city was diversity. So in my village, there was only my tribe that lived there. But here, there were more than one tribes, and they talked different languages. And I call this place, or when I moved here, was my new world. And the difference between my village and the city that I moved to was like threefold. One, economically, was totally different. In my village, we only grew everything that we had to eat, and we had the cows and many animals. But here in this city, there were a lot of business being developed, and there were so different lifestyle here. And in my village, you could find only 100 houses, 300 people probably maximum, was called a maintenance, but in Uvira, 350,000 people, very diverse, and it was hot and humid and technology. But also I found something very challenging. The poverty in the city of Uvira was just unbelievable. One of the things that shocked me when I came here in this city was technology. It was my first time to be introduced to electricity, vehicle, motorcycle, bicycle, and everything. But when I saw the TV for the first time, it was just unbelievable scene. I could not believe that something happening in Paris or Amsterdam or Oslo or New York, you're able to see it when you're sitting not far from my village, like 3 days away from my village. So that kind of technology and getting introduced to new life was very challenging, but at the same time, I was curious to know more about lifestyle in the city. So this is where I lived. If you look at the map, where I lived in Uvira, it's not far from Rwanda, not far from Burundi, and that's where I studied my high school for 6 years. And while I was there, I learned a lot in terms of education, but also knowing a new world that was totally different from my village. The next slide. Congo, something that people don't know about Congo, and I always talk about this. It's one of the richest countries in the world in terms of natural resources, but yet people are very poor because of bad leadership, as I read in the first chapter. And in the Congo, you can find all kinds of minerals, gold, uranium, oil, coltan. And the one thing that I have to say here was some of the raw materials that I used for making cell phones and computers. I think 60% of them are coming from DRC Congo. So if you have a cell phone, you have a little bit of connection with the Congo with you. But yet people are suffering because of bad leadership and also conflict that came through the poverty and the other risk factors, of course, but one of them is bad leadership. So when I was about to finish my high school, at that time there was a civil war that was happening in Rwanda, neighboring country. So you can see where Rwanda is and where we were not far from Rwanda. So in 1994, there was a war that was happening, but it ended up happening a genocide. In 3 months alone, Rwanda lost almost 1 million people as a result of the genocide. And the people who were killing the Tutsis are the Hutus, who happened to be in the power then, but they end up being overthrown by a rebel movement called RPF, which was a Tutsi movement. And when they were chased out of Rwanda, they end up running into Congo where I was living. And it was very unsafe and had to make a critical decision of moving out of Congo and going to Rwanda because it was a little bit safe for us as a Tutsi. And the other thing that happened in Rwanda, which was very horrible, not only they lost 1 million of people, but also they lost almost 2 million people who fled Rwanda and they went to neighboring country, and the majority of them went to Congo. And this is a picture of refugees when they're running out of Rwanda and moving to Congo. But also the picture that you see down here, those are called the Interahamwe. Those are the malicious group that was being trained to perpetrate genocide in Rwanda. And moving to Rwanda, it was one scene that I will never forget in my life. When I got the first time in Rwanda, seeing the scene of the genocide. And I'll have to show you how I left Uvira, as you can see here with the blue line, the Uvira, and I went to Changugu, which is the border between Congo and Rwanda. And then I went to Butare, and I ended up in Kigali. I will never forget the first night in Kigali. It was like really a ghost town. One of the things that struck me the most was the fact that dogs were crying all night long. And when I got up in the morning and I was asking my friend, I said, what's happening here? Why is that the dog crying all night long? And he told me a story that, dogs, when the whole civil war and the genocide happening in Rwanda, and when people were killed and left on the streets, so dogs were just wandering around and eating the corpse, and they were kind of completely outraged by the whole scene. And they would cry almost like human being. But also the scene of seeing some cops around the streets, and it was a time where the new government was trying to bury all the bodies that were left on the streets, but also the destructions of the infrastructure, and just seeing the whole city almost empty was unbelievable scene. So to make a long story short, I lived in Rwanda for 6 years, and finally I went to Norway. I was attending a class in Norway, and I left Kigali and I went to Norway, as you can see here in this slide. I will never forget when I landed in Norway for the first time. And you could tell that this is a world where there's less needs compared to life that I lived in Kigali and Congo. And you could see that people were just at peace, and they didn't have to worry about what they have to eat, whereby in Africa, so many people suffered with hunger, they had no work, and it was just a miserable life. But finding a new world here was just amazing. Norway is one of the richest countries in the world, and you could tell that people were at ease and not worrying about what they have to eat and drink. And so I left Norway, and I can see a picture here. I left Norway and came here in 2002. It was June 19, 2002 that I came here in Maine. Life here in Maine was very hard. And one of the things that I mentioned when I was reading in my book is learning a new language. Never in my life I had ever thought that I will learn English. I was speaking 6 languages when I left Rwanda, but coming here and facing a new language again, and when you have to start from scratch, was just unbelievable challenge. So I want to talk a little bit about why do people migrate or move. So there are so many reasons. One of them is seeking for safety, peace, liberty, freedom, wealth. These are things that humanity has always sought after from generation to generation. If our environment does not offer what we need, it is time to move to whatever environment offers a greater degree of things that we constantly seek for. What are the major causes of immigration is war, social and political conflict, natural disasters, seeking for social and economic opportunities. And that's why you see so many people who are here now that you haven't seen or you never knew before. And some of them are coming from countries like Congo, some of them are coming from Burundi, some of them are coming from Rwanda, Angola, and the other countries. And the majority of Central African countries, it's because they are coming here and seeking for new safe home or safe place to live. And of course, the other ones who come because of looking for opportunities and here in America. So according to the International Organization for Migration, World Migration Reports, and again, this is all the statistics, but in 2015, the number of international migrants was estimated at 244 million. And this number continues, if this number continues to grow at the same pace as during the last 20 years, it could reach 405 million in 2015. The United States is undoubtedly still the land of dreams, a fact which has always inspired millions of people around the world to want to migrate here. And there are millions of people stationed in the stations and transitional camps around the world, waiting to migrate here in America. And I have to say this, if you go in Uganda, for instance, or Kenya or Tanzania, you find huge refugee camps. And some of them like 100,000, 50,000, and all of them are the people who've left their countries, whether it's in the Congo or Burundi, and they are waiting to see if peace can be established in their own countries or resettled somewhere else, or either here in the US or Canada, Australia or Europe. So those are the people who go through, have gone through a lot, and they're just hoping that one day they can find a safe place to live. So there are millions of others lined up in a queue outside every US embassy around the world seeking a visa. And their annual level of migration in US averaged 1.8 million between fiscal year of 2002 and 2006. Of course, the number here has dropped tremendously within last administration. I think the last time I checked, they were talking about 15,000 that were coming every year. So many people have moved here from different continents and from different background, poor or rich, uneducated or educated. Once they are resettled, they go through a long and depressing integration process from which takes years to recover. I think when I read the chapter, my chapter 35 of my book, you discovered how not easy it was for me to get into the process of integration here. So once they are resettled, they go through just the process of resettlement elicits an array of feelings, hope, relief, as well as confusion, guilt, grief for family left behind. There are millions of people who have left their native African countries to resettle in the United States. New menaces every year are expected to arrive. So this is the difference between new immigrants here. And I'm sure you know this, but in case you don't, there are immigrants who are here seeking for opportunities, and those can come on different visas. Some of the, whether it's all kinds of immigration visa that US have, whether it's a type B or other student visa and everything. But there's also the refugees who are seeking safeties. And the difference between refugees and asylum seekers is that the refugees are brought from the country where they have been stationed. Like, let's say somebody moved from Congo and go to a refugee camp in Uganda or Kenya or Tanzania. And from there, the resettlement agencies will go there and try to process them for them to come here in the US. And from Kenya or from Uganda or from Tanzania or whatever country they may be, they will get the status to come here in the US. and those are refugees. But the asylum seekers are people who come here on a visa, but yet with the intention of staying here because they are fleeing persecution or conflict. And that's a huge difference. When somebody comes here as a refugee, they already have the benefit already waiting for them, whether it's housing, whether it's other welfare and the other assistance they may get. But for the asylum seeker, they would just come here by alone and starting to find their way in. And one of the first process of the integration is applying for asylum and waiting to be granted. And then once they get the asylum status, and then they can start their lives there. That's the difference between the two. So I put this picture here just to show the difference of where I was born and where I am. And this is a New York City picture or slide. And if you look the difference between my village and here, you can see how the systems are different. So imagine someone being born in a village and coming here, and where you have to figure out the whole system. It can be very challenging. And for me, when I wrote my book, that's where, the metaphor for saying that ladder to the moon, it was just like somebody from my village to here, it's like a landing in the moon. And that's just because the system, how different it is. So this is my house, my small house in Portland. I've lived in this house for the last 13 years, and I enjoy it very much. But you can tell the difference where I was born and here. It's a huge difference. And this is my family. Oops. Sorry.
I think that's the last slide.
Yeah, that's the last slide. And with that, thank you for listening, but also now going to give enough time for questions.
Yes, I invite you all to, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box now. George, thank you so much. That was very well put together and really helped illustrate your journey for us. And again, I especially appreciate that at the end, you brought it back to how difficult the transition was. Just listening to your initial transition from living in the village to moving to the first city, and then imagining it on such a much larger scale of moving to the United States. While we wait for some questions, I did want to ask you a few things. So when you were considering where to immigrate to, how did you specifically decide upon the United States? For instance, you said that when you were visiting Norway, it was so amazing and wonderful there. What was it about the United States that was such a big draw?
Oh, that's a good question, Julia. Thank you. I did not so it happened just for me to be here in the US. And while I was here, my intention was not to stay over here, but at the time that I was here and attending a conference, it happened there was another conflict that was happening back in Rwanda and between Rwanda and Congo. So I could not go back either to Norway because my visa to Norway had expired, and I was stuck here and unable to go to Norway or to go back home. So that's how I ended up staying here in the United States. So it was not by choice. It was just the circumstantial thing that happened, and I could not go back to Norway. But if I had to make a choice, of course, I could have stayed in Norway because I had already friends and the connections there. But it was just circumstantial thing that happened and made me stay here.
Are you familiar with how are other countries' immigration policies different from the United States? Like, for instance, is it generally, I mean, we so frequently, because we live in the United States, hear about, as you mentioned, that we are the land of dreams. We are the place that, is the goal for so many people to want to immigrate to. In your experience, do other countries have that sort of reputation or that same draw, or do their immigration policies just make it too difficult to immigrate there?
I think it's different. Like, for instance, in Norway, I remember I had a little bit of experience in meeting with some refugees who were there, or people were seeking asylum. And when you get in Norway, the first thing they do, you go to the airport or whatever entry port that you go to, they will just put you in a refugee camp because they are what they call their samstak, which is a place where you stationed or you stay until you are granted the asylum and you can come in the country, or if you are denied, you can be deported. So that's a totally different from here in the US. I've never seen any refugee camp or some place where the only refugees or asylum seekers are staying until they are granted asylum. So the beauty about the United States, you come here, if you decide to seek for asylum, then you start the process. You look at a lawyer, you start the process. After 150 days, you have your work permit. You are able to start working and get a job and sustain your life yourself. So it's not like where in many countries where you're just there waiting, not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's a huge difference there. And that's also, but also the other thing, I get a chance to visit Europe. Like I have friends in the UK, I have friends in Holland, I have friends in Norway and the other places. But the opportunity that you find here in the US, you cannot find in so many countries. So we have to be honest. And so that also can cause people who are from other countries to want to come in US because they are going to start working and providing for their families, but also sustain their family back home, because when you leave your country, you will never forget back home, because there are people who are hoping they can be a source of a revenue and support them while they're still there. So that's a huge difference there. Mm-hmm. But the system also, I know here now things have changed, because I remember when I came here in 2002, the process was very quick. It was like 3 months, you already know if you're going to get this status or not. But now things have turned into 6 years, 7 years. I know people have done 8 years without clear knowledge of their final status. So, and it has to do with the backload, and there are so many refugees, asylum seekers right now. But then it was easy and quick, and also you know where you stand in terms of the status.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump into some questions that came into the chat box. This was one that came very early on from Janet. She says, how old were you when you went to the city from your village?
I was 14 years old. I had just finished my, what they call primary school, and I moved to the city. And I was young. I missed home very much, but because my village had no high school, what we call high school, which is 6 years after the primary school. And I was very young, and leaving my family behind wasn't easy, but I had to do it.
That's amazing. I can't, imagine 14-year-old teenagers out on their own like that in a brave new world. Okay, so Stephanie asks, how receptive has Maine been, in your opinion, as a new Mainer, and what could we do differently?
I mean, I really had little to complaints about the Maine, because it's been very friendly from the time I came here. And of course, the people were very friendly and welcoming, and I have no complaint about that. But the only one thing that we can do differently is making the availability of resources. And one of the reasons we started Amjambo Africa was just the lack of resources then, and how to access the information. And you can imagine that when you are here, imagine that if you don't know English, you become like a baby. Like they have to, you have to be, you worked in everything actually, because you can't even, I always think, I remember back then when we go and buying something like from the mall, and when you bring it home, you have the menu, and all the menus in English. How in the world, and some were in Spanish, but how do you put even your table together? How do you, it was just like from the beginning, you just struggle about everything. And what we can do differently, just of course, making available the resources, all the necessary resources for people to access them and be able to quickly navigate the system and sustain their lives and their families' lives. So that's something that we can all improve. But from the beginning, people were very friendly. And of course, I've had my own struggle, which is just get to know the system and to navigate the system. But other than that, it was very friendly.
Well, that's good to hear that we're, going in the right direction. Tobin wants to know, what methods did you use to learn English? I found that watching movies with subtitles helped me learn some Czech when I lived there as a student. I'm always interested to learn best practices in learning languages. So you, as someone who spoke 6 languages before moving here, how did you best learn English?
So I'll tell you a little bit of story. So when I came here, I'd already graduated from college, so I was speaking French, Swahili, Lingala, Kinyarwanda, and other languages. So the first thing that got me was denial. So I was into a denial that I'm going to learn a new language. And I was just like trying to find a comfort zone, somebody that I can talk to in English. And I was like almost running away from learning English. But of course, and then something kicked in and I realized that this is the only one way to succeed in this country, is learning English. So I was lucky enough to get a scholarship from USM. It was like 2 semesters, and I went there and started learning English and reading books and watching movies. And yes, well, that was one of them. But I'll tell you the most helpful thing is to find somebody that you can team in and talk in English. Yes, you can watch the TV and you can hear, the hearing comes very quickly, but then talking is a horrible experience because you try to figure out how you're gonna come up with the right word and it doesn't come out. And when you do it twice, you get frustrated and your tendency is to give up and just go and find somewhere else, so some place to sit and grieve. But one thing that I'm going to ask you this, if you have a friend from the immigrant community, and I know the American people are very, very polite, they don't want to offend people. If somebody is struggling, finding the right way to speak a word, just be kind and correct them. Of course, because the one thing that I always, when I started working at Avesta Housing, I will say something and people say, oh, you're doing all right, you're doing all right, where I knew that I wasn't doing all right. But I wish some people would be able to be open and say, look, I'm trying to help you here. This is how you say this word. Because like if you already have a background in French, it becomes even harder because some of the words are the same, but the way you say them is different. And now you have to keep, your mind is racing like 100 times in a second, trying to find how is this word I know in French, but how do you say it in English? And when you try to say, you just mix things up and it's very, very hard. So English, and I read a little bit of it, is one of the challenging things for every immigrant, but yet it's one of the beneficial things they need to have as a tool for survival here in this country. So if you know somebody, engage them in a friendly way, help them to get to know English, and you'll be like serving them better than anybody else.
And I think it's important to mention that the organization that we talked about at the top of the program, Connecting Across Cultures, what you described, having an American to speak with, to practice your English with, that's exactly the type of resources that we're looking to put together up here to have available to folks so they can get connected. So the next question actually is from Janet, and she happens to be part of our Spanish speaking group that gets together on with the library to practice speaking Spanish, because if you don't practice it, you lose it. So
Yes.
Janet says, did you migrate did your family migrate with you? And are you able to maintain contact with your family in the DRC?
No, my family did not migrate with me. So my little family, the small family that I have here, so my wife, my 2 kids were all born here. One was born here, the other one was born in Canada. My wife is originally from Rwanda, but she migrated from Rwanda to Canada, and we got married when she was living in Canada. But I left almost the entire family back in Congo, and of course, throughout the conflict, some of them ending up in Rwanda. I have some in the UK. I have another one in Canada. So they're spread all over the world due to the conflict. And that was also very hard to leave your family behind and not knowing what's going to happen for them. It was very hard. But also knowing that you have to work very hard and sustain them or support them financially was another challenging. So many immigrants are experiencing right now. And the one thing that I tell you, like most of the immigrants people that I know, they work more than one job, 2, 3 jobs, just because one job cannot cut it. So they have to be, because they're source of income here for their families, but also source of income back home. So it's a very, very hard.
That sounds extremely demanding. So Brenda asks, if you happen to know, what is the current waiting period for an asylum seeker to be able to work?
So the current is 150 days. It hasn't changed, if I'm correct. So from the time you're here, when you submit your application for asylum seeker, you wait for 150 days and you are able to get a work permit. And something that changed recently, so work permit, I think it's no longer 1 year. It used to be 1 year and it expires and you have to renew that. So it's been now 2 years, so you renew that, which is very, very good. But also, I wish you could be extended more than 2 years, but it is what it is, and those are something that we cannot change. But 150 days, and then you start working, and then you start your life here.
Kit asks, could you please briefly talk about the current difficult situation in the DRC with the, and I apologize, Banyamulenge? What is it like for the Banyamulenge to know what is going on back home?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's something that I've struggled with throughout the 19 years that I've lived here in the US. When I left in 1994, I was hoping that things would change after a few years, but since then it has never changed. It's still happening even now. So for instance, last Friday, we had almost whole day peaceful demonstration in downtown Portland, but also in so many other cities around the country. And we're trying to raise the awareness of the killings of the Banyamulenge, which has been happening for many years. But from the last 4 years, the situation has gone worse, and it's not changing. And our hope is that the U.S., as the most superpower country, can do their best in trying to put pressure onto the Congolese government to change the situation. So the situation hasn't changed, and there's so many Banyamulenge right now. I think throughout the country there are more than 7,000 people from the Banyamulenge community, and they're really crying out for change in the Congo.
And is this a story that you're covering regularly in Amjambo Africa?
We cover so many issues, but yes, we do cover that sometimes, but again, it just keeps happening that it's so hard to keep up with it.
In our country, just the tendency of the news cycle, we don't get to hear very much about, what is happening in other countries and other continents. Can you talk a little bit about the publication that you co-founded with Kit and just give us a few more details for folks who may not know about it, and then how they can find out more about it?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story. When I came here, I will never forget this first year that when I came in 2002, one of the questions that people were asking me all the time was, where are you from? And I would tell them Congo, and they would happen to not know where Congo was, and they said just Africa. But also one thing that shocked me the most was the fact that few people knew what happened in the Great Lakes region of Central Africa, which includes Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo. And to give you perspective, for the last 25 years, Congo, Burundi, and Rwanda, we've lost more than 6 million people as a result of the conflict. That's, for instance, like killing the whole entire population of Maine, New Hampshire, and Connecticut. Imagine like the whole Maine population, New Hampshire, and Connecticut wiped up in just 25 years. So when I came here, for us, we've lost almost everything. But here, people have no knowledge of what happened back home. And I was thinking, if there's a country that has lost that many people, you would think the whole world would know about it. But I was shocked to see that nobody, I mean, few people knew about it. And that's because of the media. The media does not cover, the information from Africa for some reason. And that's one thing that when I was trying to figure out what is that thing that I can do to help my people, but also to help educate the American people about what's happening and why people are coming here, and just to make a connection between the conflict in the African countries and why people are moving here. Because I know I'm acutely aware of the xenophobia about the refugees. New people are here to take away the resources and all other, misinformation that is out there. But we want to make sure that we can be a source of information, first for the immigrants with the resources available, but also for the public and for the mainstream America to know the connection between why people have moved from faraway countries and coming here in Maine and other states in the United States. So that's why we took the lead and start educating people. And it's an amazing journey how from the first publication and now how far we've gone, because now people are coming to us, reading our news to find out what's happening there. And it's good news that we have now some correspondents in Africa who are feeding us with fresh information from the continent. And it's a very inspiring. And I'm very glad that we got connected with the kit and everybody involved to get the Amjambo Africa as one of the outlets here in Maine.
And it is printed in multiple languages within the publication,
that's the beauty of it. It's because we started with the 4 languages, which include the Kinyarwanda, Swahili, English, and French. And when we start publishing, and there was so many people who are reaching out to us and say, can you include the Lingala? Can you include Portuguese? Can you include in this and this? And I was telling them, I wish we have the whole capacity in the world so we can publish in all languages that are spoken here. But unfortunately, we didn't have the resources. But now we are up to 6, and we are shooting for Spanish and hopefully Arabic. So it's amazing how, we want to accommodate people with the information, because nowadays you cannot live without information, and you got to make sure that you can access the information in any way you can possibly do. And
the newspaper can be found pretty much anywhere you pick up newspapers in the stores and in the libraries and things. And I want to point out one more question and then one more comment, and then we'll wrap up. Susan wants to know, is the conflict in the DRC largely related to the mining of metals, and who has access to those resources?
Part of it, yes. And as you know, so the Congo is rich, but also poor, which is very conflicting when you say that. But one of the things, because there's not that many opportunities for people to work and get a job, a decent work, and provide for their families, so they will default into trying to occupy a space where you can mine and do businesses with selling all the kind of minerals. So that's one of the facts that causes the conflict. But at the same time, it's also more politics and bad leadership. And I always blame the leaders, because when the leaders are in power, they will take away all the resources and leave nothing for the rest of the population. And I'll tell you a story. When I was born in the time of Mobutu Sese Seko, who was the president from 65 until 1997. And then he was one of the richest person in the world. And that was not because he was getting, he was smart or doing things, but it was just because of taking all the resources away from everybody and just harvesting for himself. So it's a very unfortunate. And my hope is always that you can find a good leader in the Congo who will be able to share the resources, because there are plenty enough to share to everybody, but just the bad leadership that has caused the whole conflict.
Okay, I said that there was only going to be one more question, but one more very good one just popped in. Ecologically, how is the Congo doing? Is climate change also adding stress?
Yeah, Congo, it's, those are the things that they don't talk about because they have so many things to worry about. But of course, it's happening everywhere. But one good thing is that like Congo, they have the forest, equatorial forest. It's the second largest forest in the world after the Amazon. But it's really a country that has almost everything, but things that can change and in terms of the weather. And I'm sure there have been some like a flooding and like a recent last year, we had one of the largest flood in the city that I was talking about, the Uvira, the way I studied. So it's happening everywhere. And I'm sure Congo will not be spared. So, but of course, we gotta do something to stop it.
Well, thank you again so much. This has been a very informative and insightful evening for all of us, I'm sure. I just wanted to real quick say aloud for the folks who are watching this as a recording, if you're interested in finding out more information about how you can help with connecting across cultures, the email address to reach out to would be cacmidcoast@gmail.com. If you have any trouble remembering that or getting that written down, send me an email and I'll write it down for you. And also I encourage you all to check out the Amjambo Africa website and look for it where you buy your newspapers and where your newspapers are located around town, and pick up a copy and take a look at this wonderful work that Kit and George have been doing. Thank you so much, George. This has been a really wonderful evening listening to your story. Oh, is your memoir available anywhere?
It is now available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So if you go there, you should be able to get a copy if you're interested in it. It's a very, yeah.
One more time, what's it called? Just so that we
it's
know.
called Ladder to the Moon, A Journey from the Congo to America.
Ladder to the Moon. All right. Thank you so much. Well, I hope we have an opportunity to have you back again because this was fantastic. And I want to let all of you know who joined us tonight. We did record this. If you didn't hear me say that at the top of the program, you can find the recording on the Camden Public Library Program's YouTube channel. If you want to share that recording with your friends and family and everyone, please do so. This is a great story. People need to hear it. Okay. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and I hope to see you at future Camden Public Library programs. Visit us online at librarycamden.org. Have a good evening. Take care.
Thank you.
Good night.